the Afghanistani, the Iraq, the Iranian, all these people start their own little enclaves. And then you get politicians who run those little enclaves, who are then voted into local councils. And we have been decimated as an island nation because we've lost our own identity. It is now what they call a bastardized identity, because a lot of the people who can afford to get out emigrate to Australia, New Zealand, or the south of France. So they get out.
It's no better there. My friend was Greg Hallett, and he took a lawsuit against the British monarchy for their illegitimacy. I believe he's since been murdered, and a lot of my followers believe the same thing. His works have been so widely publicised that he's like you. Nobody dare take him on in law. His truths were...
not take me on in law. Stick me on a pedestal, a one-to-one with David Cameron. I would put him into a hole because he's a piece of filth. He cannot turn round to me and say that the deal he did with the Indian government was a legal deal. He pressurized the Indian government to take a fraud, a massive money laundering fraud. And we sit here, people can't even afford a bus fare. That man is a disgrace to this nation, and so is Tony Blair, so is Nick Clegg. These people who run...
In mitigation, I would say that Cameron has been less severe and Cameron pulled out of Syria when democracy asked him to. Tony Blair killed 2 million people in Iraq, despite what democracy wanted him to do.
And that's where I fall in line with Peter Eyre, was if they use depleted uranium munitions just purely for the weight, they use depleted uranium as counterweights in aircraft. Did you know that?
Yeah, it's in the infrastructure of the plane, yeah.
It's counterweighting. And so if they've used munitions which have contaminated the soil, there is not a gas mask that is available to the military, the British military or coalition forces, that will filter out micro nanos of depleted uranium. It gets ingested through the nasal passages into the mouth, and so those populations of or generations of servicemen that work in and amongst the debris, the sand areas where depleted uranium shells and bombs have been used, are all going to be contaminated. Everyone.
Well, I believe, even there, they have what Blair did to the troops in Iraq, which was to give them injections with organophasphates so that they could get their, the titers down, which is, the number of molecules that were there to process that, so that the number of molecules in their body that were there to metabolize the nerve gases was enhanced. So they were giving them nerve gases as a prophylactic treatment for acute exposure to nerve gases. The philosophy was that we will protect them from dying in the battle zone, but they'll die they'll die a miserable death, but it's an acute protection. But that was recognized as being harmful to troops, and they have withdrawn that now. They don't dare do that again. And when I was working in Edinburgh, you could see that the returning troops that were coming into the pharmacy were completely physically and mentally shattered. They had been given that preemptive therapy, and it's dreamt up in places like Portadown, where we introduced the engineered virus as some master plan that will someday be deployed on innocent people somewhere else on the globe. And I remember being in the intensive care sector. There's a guy called Ronnie Miller, was the boss in America. He was the most charismatic intensive care researcher on the world. When Bush and Blair were taking them to war in Iraq, they got a boost in their funding because they were having to deal with blast injury victims and issues like that. And it's obscene that, we're able to take people to war, and that excites a scientific community. But the scientific community that gets supported by that are unprepared to talk up about the abuses. I've resigned from various elite bodies within the intensive care sector because they do not pay attention to the breaches and even the asset stripping of the NHS, which is going on right in front of their eyes. They're not prepared to say boo to any of the leaders, like Dame Helen Alexander, who's got so many directorates that you cannot shake a stick at them. She's making a fortune. She's the boss at Southampton University. She's the boss at Rolls-Royce. She's the boss at dozens and dozens of companies like you've described this morning. And she gets away with it scot-free, but she gets to steal 60 grand a year, 9 grand a year from every student, plus the subsistence expenses that they need to raise, because they're complicit in the government's crimes. Pre-election, Michael Moore, who's my MP, made a video that's on the front page of my website that says the Lib Dems will never condone the imposition of student fees on British students.
Yeah, so they reneged on their...
Yeah, absolutely, and Michael Moore has said that that is the biggest crime that any politician could ever commit. But he was not kicked out the cabinet for that. He was kicked out the cabinet because of his reluctance to reveal the financial crimes that we are so articulately revealing. That man is a chartered accountant.
Look, that's why I said to you, when I found out that the chartered accountant, who was the major facilitator of Val's fraud, Mr. Douw van der Merwe Viljoen, of the Viljoens of the old apartheid government, it gave me an incentive to look beyond the front of a basic fraud where there were only 2 East London victims. It was only by researching deeper that we found out there were more. And when we were interviewed by the police to ask me where I got my information from, they said that there were hundreds of victims. But when you isolate a particular victim, the people and the police are not really interested, because it becomes a figure like $50,000. But when you accumulate all the victims' lost assets, it was 130 million. And this is why our serious fraud office are negligent in understanding the crimes that are being committed on that Ponzi scam, which is the alternative investment market.
Well, I mean, I think the thing we talked about before, the police think they're clever with this because, they get to keep their friends in the lodge. They get a free beer, you maybe get, a new car for doing something particularly bad to some innocent person somewhere. But what's happening to the finances in their own home, their own children's capacity to find childcare, their capacity to keep their colleagues in the parking attendant service, and their capacity to keep their jobs in the face of the ruthless imposition of private security companies on them, on the pavements of Britain, using the methods that we've talked about, and the rising of their fuel bills in their own home by 20% a year. It is not clever to keep persecuting innocent people that are exposing that. They would be far better joining forces with them and saying to the chief superintendent, who earns at least 250 grand on the declared earnings, that they are pissed with it and they want to keep policing local and decent.
So, when you talk about...
I'm taping this, by the way.
Oh, if you talk about the people influx in this country at the moment, from Belarus, from Serbia, Croatia, Poland, what the government is turning around and saying, there's a shortfall in housing to accommodate all the people, and so they're going to have to build more houses. Nobody's turning around and giving a basic solution, which is saying the pot is full, shut the door. And that's why we end up with congestion on the roads and traffic jams. It's a never-ending perpetual cycle where, if you use basic common sense, our country is full, close the door, wait until there's vacancies. Other countries do. Other countries are
But
not.
that's how they get the device. The whole thing has been planned by elites of the magnitude of Prince Philip and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, and that guy who just recently abdicated with sticks in both hands in Spain. It's the monarchy. Have you read the work of Lyndon B Larouche on the stripping out of the G8's sovereignty so that the monarchies that used to run the G8 could run it again? It's as simple as that. Prince Philip was put in the Queen's bedroom to strip out all decency and sovereignty of the royal family in the UK. He's given, as a reward for that, access to being the controller-in-chief of the UK Navy, and he uses that to run drugs around the world with the complicity of the Dutch monarchies. What has happened in Spain is that you're seeing now, when you go to Edinburgh, where a lot of the financial tyrants reside in 50 Lothian Road, you will see that the tour guides and the people that serve in the restaurants and in the pubs are impoverished Spaniards and Portuguese that cannot afford tertiary education, i.e. university education. They're working for a pittance in a foreign country because Prince Philip is closing down all of the coal-fired and nuclear power stations. They want to put the lights out. Yeah, and they're doing it through those profiteering European conglomerates that include Iberdrola and the 9 million euros a year for its chief executive Galan, who's the professor at Edinburgh University. And that is what is driving our fuel prices up. It's all done by design. The World Wildlife Fund is commissioning the closure of those power stations and Britain's capacity to fuel itself. And you must notice, if you go to the supermarket, that the lamb comes from New Zealand, the turkey at Christmas comes from Latin America. There is no approach. If we went to war again, which is very likely if Prince Charles keeps conducting his affairs like he did in Canada, where he said that Putin was worse than Hitler, if we go to war again, the whole country will starve to death for lack of food provision within 2 weeks. Everything is globalised so that everything can be chaotic, and everybody in the presidential building can be immune from law enforcement. It's a master plan, but the people here do not notice it until their job is gone, and they dare not say anything about it while they're still in work, because they know that will throw them onto the pavements.
That's right. I said that these people are so clever in being able to manipulate the future that by the time the shit hits the fan, is that you run around like a chicken with your head cut off. It's disgusting. Anyway. So
it's not as simple as just, Britain's full and that's the end of the story. A lot of the EU funding streams are sponsored. The issuance of euros is based on the number of people that you have per capita in your country. So if you get refugees just across the border, or you can see people fleeing from Algeria and North Africa into Italy and southern France, and they're doing that on homemade boats and canoes and things. Yeah. The government condone that because there's a thing called Serco that gets them the capacity to issue new money when the refugees take their place in that death camp or the refugee home. They're in a temporary building. They have to rent that from the BNP Paribas or the IMF or one of those scams out of one of those massive financial institutions in a Rothschild building somewhere.
If you just mentioned a company name, Serco.
Yeah.
Andrea Davison, from her hideout in Venezuela, wrote an article that was published in a website about Serco and how paedophilia filters into the corporate entity of Serco and how they use it as a blackmail tool. And it's all there, it's been written, it's on the web. And so you can see Andrea Davison is operating from Venezuela as part of the same criminal network that she was allowed to run here for 20 odd
and
years.
she made a living out of issuing false passports to criminals and letting them flee across the border control.
Forging fake share certificates in oil, gas and mining companies.
Which is why I keep trying to convince you that we should spend some time on the Poulton boys who work for Baker and McKenzie, which is the biggest issuance of cross-border IPOs on the globe. The stock market frauds that they underpin are part of the same deal, and the human migration thing that I'm talked about with the issuance of money in places like Lithuania, the Ukraine, you know, the countries that are being stripped of their own currency and being imposed the Eurozone deal. The Eurozone deal is just theft. It's plain and simple, and it's corporatism to let the Rolls Royces sweep in and the Mercedes-Benz companies sweep in and displace the innocent little car factory that produces affordable cars in that country. It was the same with Kia in Southeast Asia. You know, those cars were rubbished. They were very efficient at the end of the day, and it was the same, I forget what the Germanic model was, but we used to have one. But you know, the trashy little...
Did you mention IBIS earlier on?
ISIS. ISIS is the Islamic Brotherhood menace that they're raising on the news now and telling.
Yeah.
But ISIS is actually an Intel computer firm. It's you know, they've got the capacity to release false news, and they do it every day, which is why our videos are so potent, because it's the real news, and that's why, you know, they're getting ever so nervous about it, and that's why frequently we get our communications shut down, like they were this morning when we talked about staged inquests and fudged inquests that lead to the death of loyal civil servants in this country. And we did not talk at all about Robin Cook, who tried to reverse the democratic process of going to war so that we could then sequester the Iraqi central bank. And he
died very strangely, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. His wife was refused access to the helicopter on the Cairngorms. But if we go there, it's a conspiracy theory, and we will be defamed for it. Keep talking about the money trail and where it takes us in the powers of corridor.
Yeah, the facts.
I think we'll stop there.
I'd like to do maybe 30 minutes on Miriam. What's her name?
Clegg?
Miriam Gonzalez.
Clegg.
That should get Nick Clegg's eyes watering.
So that is his fiancée, girlfriend, Mrs.
That's his wife.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they trained both in Belgium. You know, it was one of those European colleges.
She works for an American law firm, Descartes LLP, and when you look at the financials, you can understand why. Can we
do that? Can we do that later this afternoon? I'm going to go for a walk now and get some of these things uploaded.
Yeah, it'll be later on tonight.
Every time we talk now, we're beginning to inspire people that, you know, like us, are currently jobless.
Well, I hope so.
And I believe that the message that we've got to get out is that you've got to understand why people are becoming jobless. It's part of the plan. It's part of the divisive thing. You know that what happened in the 1930s in Germany was not an accident. It was all premeditated. All the exchange of staff, the placing people on the Supreme Court in America where ethnic hatred was perpetrated out of the Supreme Court using its first Jewish membership people. It is really, really, really clever, and everything that they did then, they're doing again now. Only people like you and me are noticing it at the moment, but the parking attendants know it already. They've lost their jobs.
You see, what happens is that they are individuals. Until you can engage a union, do you understand that?
But the union leaders are bought. The union leaders are bought now, so that they're compromised on the court of the Bank of England with the Cairn directors. Yeah, they're all in the same cabal. They get six figures to desert their membership for life, and the student leaders get the same thing. I told you about the Tifahad, with the man that was from Heriot-Watt University. All the secrets that we're revealing now, he knew when he was in power for a year. He appeared on Radio 4 and he licked the Vice-Chancellor's arse for imposing student fees that the Lib Dems would never condone if they were in government in the UK. The whole thing is a hypocritical lie for cash. You and me are telling the truth. That's why we're engaging larger and larger numbers of people. We'll talk about that thing later in the afternoon.
Maybe this evening, George.
Okay, cheers. Have a good walk.
Same.
I'm sorry about the Mr. Blubby comment. Just trying to engage you in conversation.
Bye.
Cheers.